Chair,
just waiting for the recording to, yes, the meeting is now recording, so I'll hand back to you, Chair. Sorry, I'll take this adherent, then I'll hand back to you, Chair. My apologies.
Chair, can I ask a question?
Yes, Mary?
Just in view of the fact of that planning officer passing away, which was very tragic, are we doing a minute's silence at this meeting, or is that going to happen at another meeting? I think it's just appropriate that we do a minute's silence for her.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, I think that would be a nice thought. What do you think, Pauline Elliott?
Yes, Chairman. Pauline McRae, can you do the honours, please?
Certainly. Could I ask everybody just to take a moment and we'll have a minute's silence for Gail Ray. Thank you, Chair. That concludes the minute's silence.
Thank you, Pauline.
Chair, with your permission, I'll continue to take this adherent.
Yes, certainly.
Councillor Allison, I see that you're here. Councillor Bradley, also here. Councillor Buchanan?
Here.
Councillor Callaghan?
Here.
Councillor Cowie is here. Councillor Craig also. Councillor Devlin. Councillor Donnelly is here. Councillor Dorman is here. Councillor Dryborough?
Yeah.
Thank you. Do we have a substitute for Councillor Hamilton?
Pauline, it should be Alan Faulkner.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harrow is here. Councillor Horsham is also here. Councillor LeBlond is here. Also Councillor Lennon, Councillor Lockhart, Councillor Lowe. Nothing from Councillor Lowe. Councillor McLachlan's here, as is Councillor Nealon, Councillor Nugent, Councillor Ross. Nothing from Councillor Ross. Councillor Scott, you're here. Councillor Shearer is Councillor Shearer.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Stevenson is here. Councillor Thompson is here. Councillor Wardlaw is here. Councillor Faulkner, could I check if you are here? Nothing from Councillor Faulkner. Thank you, Chair. I'll pass back to you.
Thank you, Pauline. Do we have any declarations of interest? No. Can we agree the minutes of the previous meeting, pages 3 to 10?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to agenda item 3, which is P21452, erection of two-storey rear extension and upper floor side front extension. And that's on pages 11 to 24. And Bernard will take us through the item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Planning permission is sought for the erection of a two-storey rear extension and an upper floor front and side extension. The property is located within Castle Wynd, which primarily consists of a mixture of detached two-storey and single-storey properties. The rear extension would project 4 metres at ground level and 3 metres at the upper floor and would be finished with a hip roof. It would be the full width of the rear of the property. The upper front extension would be located above the existing garage and include a Juliet balcony facing the road. Internally, the property would be reconfigured to accommodate 4 bedrooms and the existing driveway would be retained. In terms of the development plan, the principle of a house extension is acceptable, subject to any proposals being appropriate for the location in terms of scale, location and design. This will be considered further when I discuss the assessment of the proposal. The committee will recall that this application was deferred at the December Planning Committee. This was due to an error with the shadow analysis which had been undertaken to assist with the assessment of the proposals. The shadow plan was revised and the correct details made available for the public to view online prior to the December Planning Committee. No consultations were required for this application. Following the application, no additional comments concerning the merits of the planning application have been submitted to planning officers. However, I was made aware of correspondence that has been submitted to members of the planning committee from an objector. It doesn't raise any new issues in terms of the proposals. However, I would provide the following comment. The application has been submitted to the planning committee for determination due to the number of objections that have been submitted in accordance with the approved scheme of delegation. A request for a hearing was made by an objector, and after due consideration, it was declined, again in accordance with the approved scheme of delegation. There have also been complaints made about the handling of this application, and these have been dealt with as a stage 2 complaint. A corporate response was issued from the director following input from the complaints were not upheld, and the complainant has advised that they will now contact the Ombudsman. In terms of the application, 9 objections were received. And the issues raised are summarised in section 5 of the report. The main issues include
Chair, can I interject here? I don't know if other people are struggling, but I'm struggling to hear what Bernard is saying. It's really broken.
Yeah, same here.
Yes, you're breaking up a bit, Bernard. It's quite hard to hear what you're saying, sorry.
Right, I'll just try to mute and unmute just to see if that makes a difference. If you just bear with me. I don't know, is that any clearer?
Yes, that's better. I think maybe other members had their mics unmuted. That might be why you were breaking up. A bit better now, thank you.
Could I just clarify, Chair, at what point was I beginning to break up?
When you were speaking about the objections?
Okay, right, I'll go back and recover that point. Apologies.
Chair, can I come back in again? Your frame, your image is freezing as well. Maybe you've got a bad connection there. Perhaps you might want to switch off your video and just allow the audio. Maybe that will make it easier for you if you've got a poor connection.
Right, I'll give that a try to see if it assists. Apologies, I wasn't aware. There was nothing showing in my computer. I'll just start the representations again. Following deferral of the application in December, no additional comments concerning the merits of the planning application have been submitted to planning officers. However, I was made aware of correspondence that's been submitted to members of the planning committee from an objector. It doesn't raise any new issues in terms of the proposals. However, I would provide the following comments. The application has been submitted to the planning committee for determination due to the number of objections that have been submitted in accordance with the approved scheme of delegation. A request for a hearing was made by an objector, and after due consideration, it was declined, again in accordance with the approved scheme of delegation. There have also been complaints made concerning the handling of this application, and these have been dealt with as a stage 2 complaint. A corporate response was issued from the director following input from legal and personnel. The complaints were not upheld, and the complainant has advised that they will now contact the Ombudsman. In total, 9 objections were received, and the issues raised are summarised in section 5 of the report. The main issues raised include design, scale, appearance, parking, overshadowing, overlooking, and that the proposal would detract from the character of the area. Due to the nature of the proposals and associated correspondence, I have personally visited the property twice to get a better understanding of it. In terms of the proposal, initially a larger rear extension was proposed. However, following discussions, the scale of the rear extension was reduced and the design amended to further reduce its impact. The revised proposals are not considered to permit any unacceptable overlooking or overshadowing to occur. The design, location and scale of the proposals are considered to be acceptable. In order to ensure adequate off-street parking is provided, a condition is proposed which requires the existing driveway to be retained and a third space provided to the front of the property. In terms of the design, layout and parking, the proposals are all considered to be acceptable, and overall it is recommended the application is approved, subject to conditions.
Thank you, Bernard. That was much better. Could hear you that time. Any questions or comments for Bernard? I'll move the report.
I'll second that, Chair.
We agree with the report.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Chair, before we proceed, could I just ask to have verified we have Holly Brown in attendance at the meeting? I'm not aware of Holly Brown's status. I'm not sure if she's been invited to the meeting as an officer or in what capacity she's attending.
Thanks, Pauline. See, Pauline, yeah, let's get her hand up, Tony.
Yeah, do you want me to answer, Pauline?
Yes, please.
Yeah, sorry, Holly is a recent new starter within the service, and she's just attending today to observe to see how committee works. Sorry, I probably should have mentioned this. Stuart did know. I didn't mention it to Stuart last week, but obviously he's not here, so apologies for that.
Okay, thank you.
Apologies for the interruption, Chair.
No problem at all. Thank you for that. Moving on to agenda item 4, and that's P21452 Subdivision of Garden Ground and Direction of Single-Storey Detached Dwelling and Associated Parking, and that's on page 25. And Tina will take us through that item. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say at the outset, we did receive a late email from the agents last night asking us to defer decision again based on the grounds that they would be bringing forward more information, I think, in relation to medical grounds. But we do, what I'll come on to say is we do have further information on the medical grounds, and any decision on a deferral would be for members rather than for officers. But the email was to ourselves. It's a planning application for the subdivision of garden ground, the erection of a single-storey detached dwelling and the parking at 55 Dunedin. The application site is within the Winton Park area next to Dunedin Park. As members will be aware or will remember, the application was considered by the Planning Committee at the last committee on the 1st of December, and members decided to refer it. That was for two specific reasons. Firstly, officers were advised that the applicant did have health issues, which they wished to be taken into consideration when assessing the application. The officers, after the meeting, the officers requested that information from the agent on the day of committee. The officers, in response, the agent advised a few days later on the 7th of December that they were unaware of any health issues that were relevant and advised that the matter would be taken up with the applicant. Subsequently, the agent did come back together with a letter from the applicant setting out some health issues that applied to both applicants, and that was noted and considered by planning officers. You'll appreciate, Chair, that for confidentiality reasons we haven't reiterated health conditions in the report, but that information was submitted to officers. Secondly, the application was deferred to allow a further site visit to be undertaken by officers with the applicant and the agent. I think I did say at the last committee that we had carried out site visits. I had been to the site myself, but more importantly, or as importantly, the planning officer had been twice previously. So that was the planning officer's third visit. We arranged that visit just shortly after the planning committee, which was attended by Councillor McAdams, one of the local members, two representatives from DTA, myself and the planning officer, and one of the applicants. We were restricted in numbers just because of the COVID protocols and regulations. We carried out that site visit, which, as I say, we'd been on site before, but it allowed us to discuss again with the agent. They brought on board a planning advisor as well, so he was on site too, and they went through in detail again the proposal and were able to point out things to us as on site when we were on site. Turning back to the report, we've updated the report to take account of all of that, to take account of the medical information that was lodged, to take account of the further information that had been lodged by the planning agent via the application agent, and the site visit itself. In the report, particularly at section 6 and 6.5 and 6.6 have been updated. The report looked at garden sizes previously, but we've looked at that again. We've been asked to consider garden sizes in the local area, which we have done. Having said that, Dunedin Drive is a mixture of house types. We've got terraced houses directly across the road. There are detached houses like this one, and there are smaller bungalows, etc. So it is a real mixed bag. So although we have looked around, we also have to concentrate on what's before us, and the proposal to put a house in the garden of this particular property, which is what we've done. It is accepted that there is a mixture, but as I say, we've had to look at this one in particular, and we've set out our response to the statement in paragraph 6.6. As far as health conditions are concerned, the health information provided by the applicant did set out a number of health issues which the applicant wished us to consider in support of the need for the proposed development. The health issues raised have been detailed in that letter, but the health issues raised include a number of conditions. As I say, for confidentiality reasons, I don't want to go into that, but just generally, it's health conditions which the applicants consider would limit their ability in the future, perhaps, to keep up with the demands of an existing large house and garden. I don't want to sound unsympathetic in any way, but whilst officers have recognised these concerns, they would not generally be matters which we would consider as part of the planning argument for a separate dwelling house. It's not an integrated annex or supported living that is being proposed, so it is a separate house. My understanding is that the original house would be sold on. So for that reason, although sympathetic obviously to the health issues of the applicants, it's not really for this application in planning terms. So really, in conclusion, Chair, after careful consideration, we've taken into consideration and looked at the health issues. We've done the further site visit in detail. That was done in December. We've looked at the reports collectively within the service, the additional information. But again, we remain of the view that it's not, given the size and the character of the proposed house plot and that of the remaining what would be remaining for the existing house. We don't consider it to be compatible or acceptable in terms of the resulting usable garden ground, particularly for the existing house. Measurements have been provided, taking into consideration front gardens, driveways, side gardens that are out with the fenced garden area. But in terms of usable garden ground, we don't think it's a suitable plot. That remains our view. It is a professional planning view. As I say, we've looked at it within the service again. We've looked at other examples in the street, and we're therefore, for all of that reason, Chair, recommending that the application is refused.
Thank you, Tina.
Chair. Chair.
Jim?
Yeah.
Jim, I don't want you to mention anything just now because Councillor McAdams is going to speak first.
Right, okay.
Okay, Councillor McAdams.
That's great, thanks Chair, and I'll time myself so that I don't make any mistakes and put you any more of a disadvantage. And can I also say I completely apologise for me not knowing the correct procedures at the last committee. I haven't had any planning training, so for anything that I did that made you apologise, then I completely take that on board and I'm very, very sorry. Never have been my intention. Anyway, I'll just cover off a few things then. They are an elderly couple, they are retired. They have never at any point had a discussion with me where they have said that they are going to sell on the other house, so I don't think we should make any assumptions. They do have medical issues, and I think it is something that we actually need to look at as a local authority to make sure that we don't disadvantage people further. There is no, I checked this, there is no, there's no part of an architect when somebody's coming to him for drawings to get a house that there's no questionnaire that they answer, and there's nothing that we have that basically asks them if they've got medical conditions. So I think it's unfair when we put that onto people, especially elderly people, that's something that they should know that they would need to put forward as a discussion, but that's something that us as councillors can take forward. What I would also say is that I'm disappointed and also surprised that the planning department are still looking for a refusal on this application, but I would also like to say that I greatly appreciated the officers coming on site. It was actually very informative and I learned a few things from Tina Morag, which I greatly appreciate, that I'll share with you. So in the original report, it talked about the rear garden and it mentioned the rear garden, and I didn't really understand the significance of this, but it's not a rear garden. So that was wrong in that report, and it's wrong if it's been mentioned again in this report. So that's something that we'll need to look at and get amended. It's actually a rear garden. Now this was discussed and actually agreed, therefore the first report is wrong. So it's not a rear garden, it's a side garden. Now, for anybody like me that was ignorant to this, in planning terms, that actually makes a really big difference, because a side garden has got road frontage, which is very clear in the streetscape. I would also point out it's a modest 2-bedroom single story they're going for, and they're going for it because of their situation, they're elderly, and it's something that we actually need to look at, because 40% of the population in East Kilbride are actually like over the age of 55, and we're all passing policies that we want to encourage people to stay in their homes and within their support networks. This is definitely something that we'll need to look at. Anyway, it's a modest 2-bedroom story house, and it reflects the original house very clearly, which was also discussed. Roads don't have a problem with it, and admit that it doesn't overshadow 55. So what I would also say as well was it was also discussed when we were on site about the different gardens and the surrounding area. And see, when I say surrounding area, I mean the surrounding immediate area. And even with this house getting built into the original plot, this garden is still bigger than other gardens immediately next to it. Anyway, I'll just leave you with that. I'll thank you, Chair, for allowing me to come in. I'll thank Polly McRae for sending me an email to actually let me know what my procedure was to keep me right, which I greatly appreciated the support that I have had from the officers. And I can't thank Tina and Morag enough also for coming out to visit, even though I'm disappointed at the way it's been reflected in the report. So I'll sign off with that, Chair, and I'll thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you. I'll just wait for you to leave.
Chair. Sorry.
That's Councillor McAdams left now, Chair.
Thank you, Pauline. Jim, you wanted to come in?
Chair.
Jim? Yes?
Yeah. Right. You know, I realise, you know, that there's a lot of sympathy for health issues and things, but health issues are not really, you know, a planning issue. More important issue is the amenity of this area. Now, yesterday at the planning review body refused a similar application in the same street for the same reasons that are given here. And I don't really see any reason why the planning committee should come to any different conclusion than the planning review board came to yesterday.
Thank you, Jim. I see someone else get the hand up, but I don't know who it is. Pauline, can you see who it is?
It's Councillor Scott. Sorry, Councillor Harrow has. No, it's Councillor. It's Councillor Harrow and Councillor Scott who both have their hands up. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. We'll take it in alphabetical order then, Councillor Harrow.
Thanks very much. I'm also one of the local members, and I did go round to see this, but I didn't consider that the space was big enough for what was proposed. And are we talking about a rear garden or a side garden? I mean, surely we've been asked to discuss something that there's a disagreement as to what actually it is. Thanks.
Thank you. Tina, do you want to come in response to that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It is largely the side garden. I was confused by Councillor McAdams' reference that it's a house to the side of the others. I mean, obviously within the report we talk about the rear garden of the existing house that would be left, and we talk about the new rear garden of the new house. So that might be what's causing a bit of confusion. But really the boundary would run from the road to the rear boundary to the side. So you would have a metre or two on the side of the existing house. It's largely the side sloping garden that's the application site. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Tina. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. And first of all, thank you to the local members who obviously have preceded me on this item. Chair, I'd like to give notice that I will move a further deferral on this one, on the grounds that we await further medical information from doctors regarding the applicant's condition. To just go back and reiterate what Councillor McAdams said, this is an elderly couple with underlying health conditions. They wish to have a bungalow next door to them. They don't want to leave their current local area where they have their support structure, and they are looking for a house, a bungalow in the side garden that they currently own. Can I also say that I'm surprised and saddened that we're here that quick, because I'm from the last deferral in the beginning of December. First of all, we've had Christmas and New Year. Then obviously we're in the middle of a pandemic. And for an elderly couple with underlying health conditions, they must be going through a horrific time at the moment, because obviously they'd be exceptionally vulnerable from COVID if they got it. My view is that we have to have another deferral because we are awaiting further medical information. I'm led to believe that the letter that Tina's got about the medical condition was either from the agent and from the couple themselves. I'm led to believe through the local member, Councillor McAdams, that doctors' letters will be on their way with medical backup, saying that Mr. and Mrs. Robertson need they need a flatter bungalow, because obviously the storied house at the moment is not of the size is not good for them. So can I say that I'm happy to move that? I'll say it again, deferring on the grounds that we await further medical information from doctors regarding the applicant's conditions. I think there's been a rush to judgment here. When we deferred it in December, I thought there would be adequate time for this to sort itself out for the applicants and for them to send in the appropriate medical information. But obviously in the middle of a pandemic, medical information can be slower than normal. So thank you, Chair. I'll move that deferral and hopefully someone will come in and second it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Pauline, you wanted to come in?
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to comment on Councillor Scott's remarks about us being, quick to process this application. I mean, we've actually taken a great deal of time to look at it, and following the last committee, certainly the message that the officers got that we should attend a further site visit to further analyse and also seek medical information from the applicant, because the issue about medical issues was raised at the committee, and we did do that first from the via the agent, and then the information was forthcoming from the applicants themselves. Again, as the planning manager explained to you, we're not unsympathetic to people's health issues, particularly as people are getting older, Chairman. Indeed, I'm no spring chicken myself, and I'm thinking about my own house and whether it's going to be suitable as I'm getting older. But notwithstanding that, a deferral would give us potentially information from the doctors of the applicants, but I don't think it would have any additional information to that the applicants have provided. I mean, clearly they have issues that they perhaps can't manage in their current house for whatever reason, but I think it's already been indicated they're not planning issues. The issue here, and the applications we looked at detail by 4 experienced planners, because you employ us to give you the best possible information. So the case officer, the planning manager, myself and the director have all looked at this application in detail, and the bottom line is if a second house is built in that garden, because of the topography and the sloping site, neither house will have a suitable amenity space. So therefore, for anybody living in either house, the amenity will be less than ideal, shall I say, Chairman. So just to add that in, obviously, if members want to defer the application, it's absolutely a matter for you, and we can come back with additional medical information. But having looked at it in great detail, discussed it with my colleagues, I cannot see that any additional information would change the recommendation on this report, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline. Councillor Donnelly, I think you wanted to come in?
Yes, thanks, Chair. It was a question, basically, and maybe 2 questions. One, we are looking at this application based on planning recommendations, which is saying to refuse. Based on the planning and the size, the grounds for 2 houses would not be sufficient. Am I right? That's point 1. So I'm asking for clarification on that. And point 2, if this committee doesn't look at people's medical situations, can we get guidance to walk us through where we go with that? Because the demographics of people is changing. People are getting older, and their houses are obviously not going to be there to meet their needs, and what we do with that. So I would like to be talked through where we go with that part if planning's not the place to go.
Thanks, Mary. Would Pauline or Tina like to come in and answer that one?
I can come in there, Chair, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you.
just in answer to Councillor Donnelly's question, we are recommending refusal because we don't think it's, in terms of amenity and fit, that it's a good fit in planning terms to put a house in this garden. If you look at a plan, you know, the boundaries of the site, you can fit in a rectangle, which, you know, would be the new house. But you have to go out on site, which we've done obviously, and look at the topography, look at the levels, look at what would be left over once a house was developed or put in the garden area. In terms of medical grounds, I mean, Councillor McAdams mentioned about us not requesting medical information, and that was only raised for the first time with us at the last committee. By way of sort of explanation, if I can say it, in terms of medical grounds, normally we would only request medical supporting information where it would allow us to depart slightly or stretch the planning policy. So where you have a granny annex or supported accommodation within the plot, it may be something bigger than you would normally expect, or different in terms of layout and design. But if we get the medical information to support that, then we would take that very much into consideration. I think in this case, where it's a separate plot, the plan is to excise the garden side area for a house and build in terms of, and again, I'll caveat that I don't want to be in any way unsympathetic. There's no argument being made for supported accommodation, either by way of extension or a house that would be in any way tied to the main house or for supported accommodation. So it wasn't something that we thought was relevant in this case. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Tina. Councillor Thompson, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'd just like to second Councillor Graham Scott. I know he's looking for a seconder there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I see there's another
Chair.
hand up, but I don't know whose
Chair.
it is. Jim?
Chair. Hello, Chair.
Hello, Jim. Jim, did you want to come in?
Yes. Hey,
Okay.
I don't think health issues are relevant in the planning process. And, you know, no matter how much sympathy you have, we have to remember that buildings are permanent. People aren't. We don't know who's going to be in that area next week or next year or 10 years from now. And the amenity of the area is what's being protected here. And I say we had the Planning Review Board yesterday turned down a similar application for the same reasons in the same street. And that's what's important, is protecting the amenity of the area. And that's what the planners have done. And I don't really see any reason for deferral.
Thank you, Jim. There's another hand up, but I don't know whose it is. Do you know,
Chair,
Pauline?
we've got Councillor Callaghan and then Councillor Craig.
Thank you. Councillor Callaghan?
Thank you, Chair. I'm minded to agree with Councillor Wardhaw. What I was wondering was if we could have a view from Geraldine as far as Councillor Scott's proposal goes. Thanks.
Thanks, Stephanie. Is Geraldine available to
Yes.
speak?
Yes, I am, Councillor
Thank you.
Chair. Councillor Callaghan, you've already heard the planners explaining in terms of planning law what is acceptable, and in this case, because it is not what is being asked for is not an integrated dwelling or a granny annex, so supported accommodation, that's why the medical information could not be taken account of. It is a separate dwelling that is being proposed, which is unrelated to the main house. So in that basis, it would be you can discount the medical information.
Thanks for that confirmation. Thank you.
Thank you, Geraldine. Councillor Craig?
Yeah, thanks very much. Actually, Stephanie's just asked the question I was going to ask, so I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Don't see any other hands up. So I would like. Sorry?
Councillor Scott has raised his hand.
Thanks, Pauline. Councillor Scott.
You're
on mute.
On mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, just there was a slight technical, the picture wavered for a second there. My apologies. Given what I heard from Geraldine with her legal opinion, I take it that my motion for deferral amendment is perfectly legal, despite what Councillor Callaghan is trying to insinuate.
Geraldine?
Excuse me, Chair, I object to that comment. I'm not trying to insinuate anything. I'm just looking to clarify the legal situation. Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Chair, it would still be appropriate for Councillor Scott to make the motion for deferral, and it's a matter for the Planning Committee and whether you wish to agree with that motion.
Okay, thank you, Geraldine. I'd like to move the report.
I'll second it, Chair.
We'll have to go to a vote now then, Pauline.
Thanks, Chair. Just to clarify, the motion is that the application be refused for the reasons detailed in the report. That was moved by Councillor Dorman, seconded by Councillor Horsham. The amendment proposed by Councillor Scott, seconded by Councillor Thompson, is that consideration of the application be deferred on the grounds that we are waiting further information on the applicant's medical conditions. Can I take a vote by roll call, please? Councillor, if you state your preference for the motion or the amendment, and I'll start with Councillor Allison.
Motion.
Councillor Bradley.
Motion.
Councillor Buchanan. Councillor Buchanan, are you ready to state a preference? We'll come back to Councillor Buchanan at the end. Councillor Callaghan.
Motion.
Councillor Cowie.
Amendment.
Councillor Craig.
Motion.
Councillor Devlin.
Amendment.
Councillor Donnelly.
Motion.
Councillor Dorman. Councillor Dorman. Motion. You're muted.
Sorry. Yes,
motion. Okay.
Motion.
Councillor Dryborough.
Motion.
Councillor Harrow.
Motion.
Councillor Horsham.
Motion.
Councillor LeBlond.
Motion.
Councillor Lennon.
Amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Lockhart.
Motion.
Councillor McLachlan.
Amendment.
Councillor Nealon.
Motion.
Councillor Nugent.
Motion.
Councillor Scott.
Amendment.
Amendment. Councillor Shearer.
Motion.
Councillor Stevenson.
Motion.
Councillor Thompson.
Amendment.
Councillor Wardhall.
Motion.
Could I come back to Councillor Buchanan? Councillor Buchanan, are you, I see that your hand is raised. Are you able to state a voting preference?
Motion. Sorry.
Councillor Buchanan, are you voting for the motion? Motion?
Yes. Motion.
That's great. Okay. Thank you, Chair. I have 17 votes for the motion and 6 for the amendment. The motion is declared carried.
Thank you, Pauline. Move on to agenda item 5, and that's P21452, change of use from class 1 retail to class 2 office, and that's on page 39. And Tina will take us through the item. Thank you.
Thanks again, Chair. This is a change of use, as you say, from class 1 retail. It's a shop at the moment to class 2 office, and I understand that it's an estate agent that's proposed. It's at 254 to 256 Stonelaw Road in Burnside, Rutherglen. The application site is located within a neighbourhood centre of Burnside, and it has retail units on either side of it. The centre itself is a mixture of businesses, including a large number of shops, several class 2 units, including a dentist, a betting shop, and the estate agents, existing estate agents. There's hot food takeaways and restaurant uses as well. So it's a fairly healthy district centre with a variety of uses. The current the unit is currently used as a pet shop, which is obviously class 1 retail, and the landlord has submitted evidence to indicate that the current tenants exercise their option to terminate their lease early, and served a notice to quit in December 2019, with the said period, the 6 months period, coming to an end in June 2020. However, at the time of writing the report and just now, the pet shop remains trading. It's not strictly a planning matter in terms of the lease, but we have been kept aware of that, and it's, as I say, I think it's being renewed on a monthly basis. One of the things I would point out at the outset is it's not a council-owned property. The council are clearly the planning authority, but have no other remit in terms of the occupancy. I did just mention that because it has been raised by some of the objectors. In terms of representations, at section 5, we've set out the representations, and there have been 178 letters of objection, and the points are summarised there. I think, just to summarise, that there is a concern about the number of estate agents that are already exist in Burnside. There's 5 operating at the moment, and this would be another one if indeed it's an estate agent that moves in. It's a class 2 that they're seeking, which would allow that. It's strictly, again, not a planning issue in terms of business competition. What is a planning issue, though, is for us to consider the amount of retail that is in any one neighbourhood centre. In terms of planning policy, we don't have a percentage contained in the policy. Approximately 55% of the units there at the moment are retail. So there is a healthy number of shops. From local knowledge, any vacancies are taken up relatively quickly, but there has been a bit of more turnover in the last year or so for obvious reasons in lockdown and COVID. It's acknowledged that the pet shop does provide a unique service to Stonelaw Road. It's something that is very popular, which we understand in terms of a service that's provided locally, and a lot of the representations mention that they like to have a pet shop locally. However, in planning terms, we really just have to consider it as a retail use, and a retail use moving to a class 2 office use would be acceptable in planning terms. Given the recent, as I've mentioned, the recent economic impact of COVID and the resultant increase in online shopping, it's considered that the economic benefits of any new business that wants to invest in the area would outweigh any potential impact of the loss of a particular business. But I would stress that we don't have any control over the type of business as a pet shop, and if it was to change hands in terms of the lease in terms of a retail, any other retail use. Clearly that wouldn't require planning permission, so they could move to another type of shop without consent. In terms of the number of estate agents, as I say, there are a number, and that's accepted within Burnside, but there are a healthy number. There is a healthy number of retail units and other types of businesses. So for that reason, we're recommending approval. It would, in our view, the change from Class 1 to Class 2 would have no detrimental impact on the vitality of the neighbourhood centre, and there is sufficient retail element within the centre. The only thing other thing I would say finally, Chair, that if members do approve the application, we would propose to contact the current occupier directly, just to offer any additional assistance with relocation with alternative premises, and we can do that through our economic development colleagues. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tina. Any questions for Tina?
Chair, I have Councillor Nugent's hand raised.
Councillor Nugent.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the report, Tina. This is my ward, so I know the area very well, and I don't live far from here, and I know many other fellow councillors will know the area too. We all know that the High Street has changed significantly over the years, and it's going to continue to do so. Burnside is a vibrant and diverse main street, and it's very well supported by the local community, and this was more than evident during the pandemic. I was surprised to read the report stating that there's 5 vacant units, as there's very rarely empty sites in Burnside. Off the top of my head, I could only think of one site, and that became vacant during the pandemic. I was in Burnside yesterday, and obviously all shops were closed, but again, it appeared that there was only one site that was vacant. I totally take Tina's point that it's not for the council to decide on the tenants. You know, of course, that's not the case. What I will say though, the high streets are going to change again, and they'll change again on the back of the pandemic as we continue to move online. So I totally agree with that. But we need to protect the vibrant and bustling areas that we have and the diversity of our high streets. And I think it would be a big mistake to change the use from retail to office. I look forward to hearing the views of my fellow members, but I would like to move that we retain the site as Class 1 retail. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Councillor Curry.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, for letting me in. I'm just going to back Carol up, and I would like to second the motion what Carol's saying. There are already 5 estate agents in that one street, which isn't a huge street. The pet shop's very, very, very popular, and whilst we can't determine who gets the use of that retail unit, there's 178 objections, which shows you the strength of feeling about putting another estate agent in there. And I would agree with Carol, I haven't seen 5 empty units. These units are filled up very, very quickly. Maybe one, but when you go down one side of the street, it's all estate agents, letting agents. So I'm just going to second Carol's motion. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Lennon, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, just actually in agreement with both Councillor Cowie and Councillor Nugent. I think that it's maybe, you know, I think that like all the letters, they say basically we want to hang on to the pet shop, we don't want another estate agent, and I think that it's really easy to kind of dismiss that as, well, we don't get to pick the tenants, but we do get to decide on the use, and the use is that is a planning consideration. And you know, all the kind of built infrastructure in Burnside, a lot, you know, it's been the same for decades. Like, these are kind of assets that the planning committee has a responsibility to kind of like plan their use effectively. It's, you know, it's very easy to say, well, they can just move to another site. Like, I know that unit particularly, there are other vacant units within maybe a mile and a half's distance, but that if you're telling people, or telling a neighbourhood business to move a mile and a half away, you're telling them to restart. I think if we're going to protect these centres, we need to have like a strategic approach to it. And I think part of that is ensuring that where there are viable neighbourhood retail centres, that we do everything we can to protect them, and instead of turning them into, fairly dormant kind of office parks.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Allison.
Thanks, Chair. On a slightly different note, if there'd been a section 75 on this and wanting to remove that, there would have been need to have been providing evidence that the section 75 couldn't be complied with in terms of, I'm thinking in agriculture, where it has to be a worker on the farm. And a period is then given as to when it has to be offered to let. Has that been done here? Because there does seem to be a difference between the local members' perception of the need for retail outlets in that area and what is in the report. So has any consideration been given to asking for evidence that there is no requirement for this to be retail use?
Tina?
No, in answer to Councillor Allison's point, no, because we wouldn't really have the planning grounds to ask for that. In terms of a centre, you would expect there to be a number of class 2, class 3, which is hot food, both carry out and restaurant. So as I said at the outset, the policy doesn't require a particular percentage of retail. So it's a mixture, and a class 2 is very much a use that you would expect within a district centre. So it's not something we would normally ask for or require.
Supplementary, Chair. Sorry, I wasn't suggesting there needed to be a percentage. It was requirement by the local economy for retail units and whether that had been investigated. Because it's not, as you're saying, something that isn't a percentage, is it appropriate that we would put a condition on it that there had to be a period of 6 months when the property was offered for retail use to demonstrate whether there is or is not a requirement for that usage?
Tina?
Yes, through yourself, Chair. No, it wouldn't be appropriate in my own view, because a class 2 proposal is an acceptable use within that area. So we wouldn't ask them to demonstrate that it had been marketed for as a class 1 as part of the planning consideration.
Sorry, I used the wrong word, not appropriate. Would we be allowed to put that condition in?
We probably probably have to take a legal view whether it would be appropriate as well. But again, in my own view, I don't think it would meet the conditions, or it would be an appropriate condition for planning to add, because it's really up to the market, and it's relevant for planning to restrict the use.
Could I have a legal opinion then, Chair?
Yes, certainly. Gordon?
Yes, Chair. Through yourself, I think in those circumstances I would agree with Tina as well. A planning condition of that nature, I do not think that would be an enforceable condition. I don't think that's an appropriate condition. What the applicant is looking for is a change of use. A condition of that nature is effectively refusing the application. So I don't think that that's an enforceable condition that could be attached to this planning permission.
Thank you, Gordon. Councillor Donnelly?
Yep, thanks, Chair. I would just like to support Carol and Margaret's proposal that they put forward. I'm taken aback by the amount of people that have opposed this planning application in the community, and the swell of the community wanting to retain that as a class 1, and I think that's something that we have to take cognizance of. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Craig?
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, you've got to have a lot of sympathy with local members when they're discussing their own ward, and especially in the situation we're in is with retail being in so much turmoil. What's going to come out of this is going to be something completely different to what we're all used to. So, I'd just like to ask Tina if there's going to be any guidance, planning guidance in the offing to help councillors deal with the sort of changes that are going to be taking place in our high streets and the way we approach it from now on.
Thank you. Tina?
I might ask, defer to Pauline, Pauline Elliott, just to see, because our remit covers the economic development side rather than myself.
Thanks, Tina. Pauline, would you like to come in?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I mean, certainly we are going to be put under pressure to be more flexible about use classes. I mean, retail is dying really all around us. I mean, if you look at the news on a daily basis, big retailers are folding. Just in the news this week that Jenner's in Edinburgh is not going to be a shop anymore. That's the first time for 132 years. Debenhams has gone bust. The Arcadia Group's gone bust. So for that reason, I think there'll be more pressure on members to look at alternative uses for former retail sites, particularly ones that retain vibrancy in their high streets and maintain employment. I do understand the local members' situation and the pressure from the petitions and so on. I mean, I would say that having read the comments from members of the public, I think there's a lot of affection for the pet shop. Has been a nice use of that retail unit, which I absolutely get. You know who doesn't like a pet shop? But of course, the applicant's given notice to his landlord, and that landlord can go and rent that unit at any time to any other class 1 retailer. So there is no guarantee that a pet shop's going to stay in that site. As Tina explained to you, that if there's some sort of an issue with that particular unit and the retailer wanted to retain a presence, we could work through economic development to try and relocate them and keep that business local. But in terms of planning, I think the pressure is more on us now to try and maintain vibrancy and employment in our high streets. And I know that estate agents members are not as popular as pet shops, but that say that you refuse that, the landlord can then go ahead and try and rent his unit to another retailer. Say he doesn't get a retailer to move in, then we could be faced with the situation of an empty unit with no employment and no retention of that. I mean, who knows? So the only thing I would say, members, if you are minded to refuse this application, just be aware that you've got to come up with very strong planning reasons for that refusal, and affections for a pet shop where I understand them, but they're not sound planning reasons, because we'll be faced with an appeal that, in my view, would be unlikely to win. Thanks, Chairman.
Thanks, Pauline. Councillor LeBon, you wanted to come in?
Hi. Yeah, so I'm obviously local to the area, and I'm a member in the neighbouring council area, which has Canvas Line Main Street has a struggle to get people to take in units there. In 2019, and I'm going to echo a lot of what Pauline said here, the landlord and the tenant gave notice to the landlord that they were going to come out of there, or they wanted to renegotiate what they were paying there. Obviously the landlord has found another tenant and is working with obviously the pet shop to give them a month on month to keep them in there until all the due process is done. Unfortunately, where we are at the moment is if the pet shop goes into administration in a couple of months or whatever, then that landlord has lost both tenants. And I think that we have to realise that exactly that, the situation that we're in at the moment, where we are basically wanting the high street units to be full, not to be sitting empty, and that's actually what could end up happening. A lot of those 160 objections, I read through a lot of them, and I obviously know a lot of people that have objected, and I've discussed it with them. It's a nice thing to have a pet shop. A lot of those objectors, they don't even use the pet shop. They just don't want another estate agent. Now, another estate agent isn't going to go in there unless there's the business. If we've got someone that wants to take a unit and wants to have a viable business and wants to employ people, then I think that's what we have to look at. If the landlord ends up doing a deal with a pet shop and they can stay in there longer, then that's great. You know, and if in future a retailer wants to come back into that unit, then we can go the other way. We can go back to retail if that's what the demand is. But at the moment, the demand is for an estate agent, and you know, I'm totally in agreement with the planners here that we should be giving them the change of use.
Thank you. Councillor Lennon, you want to come in?
Hiya. Yeah, I would just like to respond, because I think there's been a bit of a discussion about kind of maybe a sentimental aspect of this because it's a pet shop. And you know, I'm not sure who it was that said, like, who doesn't want to have a pet shop, and like, you know, people like pets. Kind of conscious that these meetings are now being broadcast, so I might be doing myself in here. I actually couldn't care less if it's a pet shop. I don't have pets. I've never had a pet. I don't particularly like animals. The reason that I think that it should stay as a retail unit is because it's a strategic asset. It's, you know, it's very easy to say, like, oh well, the demand's for an estate agent. Well, if so, like, if there's such demand for an estate agent, maybe that estate agent should look at expanding into some of the brownfield sites on Stonelaw Road, like, because there's the old Shell garage. It's been derelict for about 10 years. There could be a new office block built on there. So like, there is room to expand, but there is a limited number of retail spaces in that block. And I think we should be treating them strategically. Burnside Main Street, as I tend to call it, is one of the few vibrant neighbourhood retail centres that we've got left in Rutherglen and Cambuslang. And I think that it's something that we should be very careful in order to maintain. And I do think that's a planning consideration. It's about economic development. It's not really about people being sentimental about pets. It's the fact that when you have a cluster of viable, popular businesses all grouped together, they reinforce each other and they create an economic centre and a retail centre that is greater than the sum of its parts. That's why I think we should be protecting it for retail use. I don't feel particularly strongly if the pet shop moves out and, you know, maybe someone brings in a bike shop or something else. It's about protecting the retail use of a very limited number of retail units along that stretch. And again, you know, I kind of took it as read when the paper said that there were like 5 vacant units. But then I had a look on Google Maps on my other laptop here, and I can't actually think what these like vacant units are on that stretch of road. So it really doesn't ring true. But there is, you know, there's that kind of brownfield site behind the old Tesco. So if there really is some kind of like, you know, desperate demand for office space there, then, you know, someone can turn that brownfield site back into productive use. There's a wee gap site just on the corner of Stonelaw Road and View Park Drive as well. Another unit could be built there, but I don't think that we should be undermining the retail focused nature of that by giving away one of the limited retail units that are already there in order to chase some demand that, like, frankly, I just don't think there is a compelling demand for another estate agent. I think maybe the landlord got a slightly better offer, and so they're trying to chase that up. But I don't think that that's a compelling planning reason to change the use.
Thank you. Councillor Nugent, I think you wanted to come back in.
Thanks, Chair. Well, I'm the opposite of Martin in that regard because I'm obsessed with dogs. I'm obsessed with animals. And so, Martin, Fluffy is very upset at your statement that you're not bothered about animals. What I will say, just to respond to Pauline's points, I kind of feel this has been glossed over a little bit because to me, this is nothing to do with the pet shop. It's nothing to do with the pet shop at all. Whatever is going on between the pet shop and the landlord, that's their business, and that's for them to take forward. It's up to the landlord to find a suitable tenant. The reason that I'm putting this motion forward is we need to protect the local economy, and we need to offer a choice. And in our main streets, retail is going to be that offering. I genuinely don't believe that we're desperate for another estate agent, and I think the shop should remain as it is. It should remain as retail. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair,
There's another
Councillor
hand up,
Callaghan.
Colin.
Chair, Councillor Callaghan.
Thank you, Councillor Callaghan.
Thanks, Pauline. Thanks, Chair. I tend to agree to a degree with Councillor Lennon here. I feel that, you know, it certainly sounds like this is an asset to local people, and I notice at 7.1 a reason for decision is that there wouldn't be an adverse impact on the amenity or the vitality of the neighbourhood centre. It would seem to me that, you know, local people clearly believe that there will be an impact on the vitality of the neighbourhood centre. Also note as well, it says, you know, that the number of objections received are not considered to be a sufficient planning consideration. But I would say in this circumstance that I would actually be weighing that up and thinking that that is a sufficient material consideration in the circumstances. Thanks.
Thank you.
Councillor Harrow.
Councillor Harrow.
Thanks. I'll agree with Councillor Lennon on the basis that I'm not a great animal fan either. On the planning thing, though, is there a queue of other retailers waiting to take up these units? Because if there isn't, then we're really arguing about something that doesn't exist. And if somebody's willing to take up the plot and employ somebody, I think that's better than having an empty space.
Thanks, Councillor LeBond.
Councillor Lennon's sort of said about the brown site areas that sort of rear of Tesco and everything. They have looked at trying to put those to retail, but they have a retail residential sort of mixed scheme, because they would like to sort of, you know, do different size retail on Burnside Main Street, but unfortunately there's not the infrastructure there to do that, and also there was no demand. That was why it went purely for residential. At one point, and I do agree with what is in the papers, there were 5 units. So there was the 2 banks. Obviously they've now had people in them. There was the stuff around the corner. Anyway, that's in the grand scheme of things, it's not the issue. You know, we've got a pet shop in here. If they go, what will replace it? I think what we've got to realise as well, unfortunately, is we've got a Tesco there. So Tesco sells most things that anybody on the high street is going to put there. So with retail the way it is, and you know, that is my background. I do work in retail. People are unable to pay the rents that some landlords are looking for. The fact that this landlord has found someone to go into this unit and it's not going to lie empty, I think we do have to do the change of use. But you know, I'm with sort of a lot of what Pauline and Tina have said. I've got to go with the fact that we do not have a material reason to basically knock this back, other than we would just quite like to have retail in Burnside.
Thank you. Councillor Nugent, want to come back in?
Thanks, Chair. It was just to respond to Councillor Harrow's point, just obviously kind of local knowledge. There is very, very rarely any vacant sites in Burnside. You know, Anne touched on the banks. They were, you know, the turnover was really quick. There is generally no vacant units. There's one vacant unit at the moment that's a hairdresser's, and that's been on the back of the pandemic. It's been like that for years in Burnside. As soon as any property comes on, there is a demand for it. So it's not sat with 10 vacant units, no.
Thank you. Councillor Bradley?
Thanks, Chair. It's just a question on the applicant themselves. I suppose that the applicant is the owner of the shop, but I presume that the tenant, the change of use is to accommodate an estate agent. My question is it an existing estate agent in Burnside Road who just wants to move to a bigger premises? Have you any insight into that? In which case another unit would become vacant? Is there any insight into that?
Through yourself, Chair, I understand it's a new estate agent, but we're not being asked to limit it to a named operator. But my understanding through the planning officer is it's a new estate agent, but it wouldn't be limited to that if approved.
Thanks, Tina. Councillor Lennon?
Yeah, I think that Councillor LeBlanc kind of made two quite compelling points there. The real reason that we want this is because we would quite like to have retail in Burnside, and I think that's a compelling planning reason. I think that's about economic development and being strategic about how we use the existing assets that are already there. So I completely agree with you. The only reason to knock this back is because we want retail in Burnside. But that is the point of making these kinds of decisions. And lastly, you made the other point as well that retail will struggle to pay the kind of rents that landlords are looking for. And again, you absolutely hit the nail on the head. If we let landlords do whatever they want with the assets that they own, then they'll be able to charge whatever rents they can, and retailers a lot of the time won't be able to keep up with them. But we don't let people do whatever they want with any bit of land that they own. The point of having a planning process is to make strategic decisions about what the best use of these assets is and what uses should be permissible. And that's why I think we should maintain this as a retail unit, so that whoever happens to own it has to meet the reality where it is and charge the kind of rents that retailers can afford to pay.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other hands up. Okay, I'll move the report.
I'll second it, Chair.
Councillor Lennon?
Sorry, just to clarify, has no one moved to reject the report?
I did.
Oh, sorry. Have you got a seconder?
Yes, Councillor Cowie.
Chair, if you're happy to move on to the vote.
Yes, that's fine, Pauline.
Okay, thank you. Just to say, we have lost Councillor Devlin, and unfortunately, as she wasn't there for the entire duration of consideration of the application, she can't be included in any vote as it's a quasi-judicial meeting. So I'll start off. The motion moved by Councillor Dorman, seconded by Councillor Horsham, is that the recommendations contained in the report be approved and that detailed planning permission is granted subject to conditions. The amendment proposed by Councillor Nugent, seconded by Councillor Cowie, is that the application be refused and that the site be retained as a Class 1 retail use to protect the vibrancy and diversity of the neighbourhood centre. So if I can ask for you to state your preference for motion or amendment. Councillor Allison.
Motion.
Councillor Bradley.
Amendment.
Councillor Buchanan.
Motion.
Councillor Callaghan.
Amendment.
Councillor Cowie.
Amendment.
Councillor Craig.
Amendment.
Councillor Devlin. Councillor Devlin, as I say, we have lost Councillor Devlin, and she has unfortunately not able to state a preference. Councillor Donnelly.
Amendment.
Councillor Dorman.
Motion.
Councillor Dryborough.
Motion.
Councillor Harrow.
With the same stress as Councillor Craig, amendment.
Councillor Horsham.
Motion.
Councillor LeBlanc.
Motion.
Councillor Lennon.
Amendment.
Councillor Lockhart.
Amendment.
Councillor McLachlan. Councillor McLachlan, can you state a preference, please?
Beg your pardon. Amendment.
Councillor Nealon,
Amendment.
Councillor Nugent,
Amendment.
Councillor Scott,
Amendment.
Councillor Shearer,
Amendment.
Councillor Stevenson,
Amendment.
Councillor Thompson,
Amendment.
Councillor Wardhall.
Motion.
Thank you. Chair, there are 7 votes for the motion and 15 votes for the amendment, and the amendment is declared carried.
Okay, Pauline, thank you. Moving on to agenda item 6, it's P21452, erection of residential development comprising 19 flatted units and associated works. And that is on page 57. And Bernard will take us through the item. Thank you, Bernard.
I'm just going to keep my camera off for just now. Hopefully that will allow for a better internet connection at the moment, so apologies. Planning permission is sought for the erection of a private flatted development containing 19 units, which would be a mixture of 2 and 3 bedroom properties. The site is located within a conservation area and is also adjacent to a listed building. There are level changes within the site, and this is reflected in the proposed design, which would be a 4-storey building. However, it would only be 3 storeys at the front. The building would have a flat roof, and externally it would be finished in a combination of facing brick, rough cast and timber cladding. The development would contain garden ground and dedicated parking for 38 vehicles. Planning permission was previously granted for an almost identical development in November 2016, and whilst there was a debate with the developers over whether that consent had been implemented, it was the view of the council that it had not, and consequently this application was submitted. In terms of the local plan, the site is designated as a conservation area within an urban area. The principle of a residential development at this location is considered to be an appropriate form of development, and this is further reinforced by the previous planning approval for a flatted development on the site. No objections have been raised from consultees subject to the use of appropriate conditions, and these comments are summarised in section 4 of the report. 5 representations were submitted in relation to the application, which raise issues including design, scale, location of the development, drainage, privacy, noise, traffic, and overall impact on the conservation area. In general land use terms and policy terms, the principle of a residential development.
Oh, Amen. Thank you. Thank you. Bye. 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 Councillor Devlin, could you mute, please?
Sorry.
Thanks, Bernard.
In general land use terms and policy terms, the principle of a residential development at this location is acceptable. The proposed development would make use of a brownfield site and contribute to the regeneration of the surrounding area. The previous approval for a flatted development at this location is also a material consideration. The design, layout and scale of the development are considered to be acceptable, along with the impact on the conservation area. In terms of the size of the development, it is below the threshold at which contributions for housing, education or roads would be sought. However, a contribution for community facilities will be required, and this would equate to £1,500 per unit, giving a total of £28,500 for the whole site. A residential development at this location would not alter unacceptably the character of or amenity of the area, nor will it be impacted upon unacceptably by reason of traffic generation, parking or visual intrusion. The proposal represents an appropriate form of development at this location. It is considered that the application complies with the relevant local plan policies and is acceptable. It is recommended that the application is granted, subject to conditions, and the conclusion of a legal agreement to ensure payment of a financial contribution relating to community facilities.
Thank you, Bernard. Any questions for Bernard?
Yes, Chair.
Jim, go ahead.
I'll preface what I'm going to say by reminding people that in other local authorities, they charge Section 75 charges are made per unit. In other words, it's one house, 100 houses, there's a Section 75 obligation. And this report, the fact that we have 19 units, which is one below what is our normal figure for looking for Section 75 agreements, just highlights that this is not a council policy. It's a working procedure, if you like, of the planning department. Now, we've been promised in the past that this was all going to be looked at. And I think this just highlights the confused state we're in. We haven't yet had any changes made to it by the committee. Nothing been brought to the committee to change the way we operate. And I think, hello? And I think that in this case, you know, while a contribution made on what appears to be a voluntary basis, you know, should be welcome, we normally have a contribution which is for education, social housing, and community facilities. And I don't really see any reason why in this instance we shouldn't ask for the same contribution to be made. Now, I know I'll be told it's only 28,000 and that's not a lot for social housing, it's not a lot for education, but there's a principle here. When we give planning permission for somebody to build housing units, we give them the ability to make a profit. And in principle, the community should share in that benefit. If we confer the benefit of planning permission, the community should get a reward for that. And I think this highlights, this particular application highlights that the confusion exists. Right? Over 20, you require a payment. Under 20, you don't. And I think it's really time that we sorted this out. So I would be much happier to see this formalised. The contribution was for education, social housing, and community facilities, which are things that we all agree are necessary.
Last Pauline to come in there.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks. Councillor Wardhall, I know we do discuss this regularly at committee, and I think I have explained to members that we are looking at our policy as regards contributions and have been for some time. Some of that work has been delayed due to the COVID pandemic because we in particular want to look in detail at our policy for community contributions and come up with a formula similar to the one that we used for education for calculating those contributions. And we do have a consultant, Ironside Farrar, who's doing that work for us. We've only just recently got the kind of initial findings from the consultant, and it's not quite ready still to bring to members. So I think, yes, I understand members want to discuss this. I know it's dear to your heart, but we want to be able to do it out with the committee in an awareness session where we can debate it, because there's no right or wrong reason here, and there are various options, and I feel that members need to be making informed decisions, looking at all the issues and debating and looking at them properly, and it is there. We'll be looking at dates quite soon, and probably there'll need to be more than one session. The other thing is, I think it'll be quite difficult to have these kinds of sessions on Microsoft Teams. It'd be much better to have them face to face, although I do appreciate that under current circumstances that's not going to be possible. But we have a draft agenda for members that will kind of remind you about the legal background of contributions in Section 75. We'll talk to you about the process map that we've established and how the contributions links in with the capital programme, and then your own member decision making. We want to make you aware of the formula that Ironside Farrar have been looking at for community contributions and changing how we calculate those, and together with some work on open space and green space that we'll be looking for contributions and changing that. And part of that debate will be around the threshold for when we start charging. Is it 20 units? Do we drop it to 1? Do we drop it to 5 or 10? The only thing I would say, members, and we do have to debate this in detail out with the committee, is that with my economic development development hat on, and we've spoken about the pressure that's going to be on the authority to bend rules and be more flexible to try and kickstart the economy post-COVID, is that the 20 units tends to be the smaller builders, the smaller developers who are locally based, are employing people locally, and aren't necessarily able to make the contributions that the big multi-house builders can. So I think that's going to have to be part of our debate. So I do promise you, Councillor Waterall, we'll try and get a couple of dates in the diary very soon to debate these out with the committee. Having said that, this is a renewal application, as Bernard has outlined to you, and they are paying the full community contribution as laid down in our current policy for contributions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Pauline.
Supplementary, Chair.
Okay.
I hear what Pauline says, and this has been a long time coming, and I'm not really sure why we need to have consultants involved in establishing a matter of principle for councillors and for the council as a whole, that contributions should be made by developers who are granted permission for any size of development. And I really think it's something that we've been dragging our feet on. I can't remember when we last were told that we were working on a policy. I know I've been asking questions about Section 75 for as long as I can remember, and I think a lot of other members of the committee and members of the council who are not on this committee have got reservations about the way we operate Section 75 agreements. I'm aware that a lot of developers have told me that they regard South Lanarkshire, to be blunt, as a soft touch. They don't get the kind of contributions that other authorities ask for. And I think it's time that we did. And I think it's time that we made this a matter of urgency. If we give planning permission to somebody to build something, build residential accommodation on which they make a profit, I think the community is entitled to be given a reward for giving that permission, to share in that prosperity, if you like. And I really think it's a matter of urgency. And I'm really tempted to ask this, for this as a test case, if you like, for this application to be deferred so that a proper Section 75 agreement could be established with the developer.
There's another hand up, but I don't know whose it is. Pauline, do you know who it is?
It's Councillor Donnelly.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Donnelly.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm seeing, and I'm probably needing guidance, I'm seeing that, is it 6.10 is the developer's contributions. So can we go for a meeting of this planning committee, an awareness session, to talk about the point that Councillor Warhaw's making to go forward here? Because I'm getting a bit confused, and if we're missing something with developers going forward in terms of their contribution, I would like that spelled out to me. So I would like the planners to help me walk the walk and talk the talk, because I'm totally unsure. The second point is, in this development, are we talking about a flat roof project here? Having been a homeowner of a flat roofed building, and we had really bad weather one year and the whole roof got taken right off, and I had to get the whole roof replaced. These people could end up in the same boat if we had a bad year in terms of weather, the roof coming off. So I wouldn't like to be in the top flat in this building if it is a flat roof.
Chair, I think Pauline Elliott wants to come in at this point.
Chair, if I could just maybe ask Bernard Darragh to come in and answer the design question, and then I'll come back on the Section 75 contributions question. That's all right.
Okay, thank you, Bernard.
Yes, Chair. It is proposed to be a sort of contemporary flat roofed development. It's not uncommon for blocks of flats. I know Councillor Donnelly's concerns about flat roof and the history of them in Scotland, and they don't always last well. I think the technology has changed a lot, and it is still something that is fairly often the case for flatted developments, particularly when they go above 2 or 3 stories. In this case, it's a 4-storey building, so it's not uncommon, but your concerns are noted, Councillor Donnelly. If you want to come in, Pauline.
All right, thanks, Chair. Members, I understand your impatience and your desire to have a training awareness session on contributions. As I explained, some of the things that we want to discuss with you have been delayed due to COVID. And the reason, Councillor Wardrow, that we want a consultant and we have used a consultant to help us with a formula for our community contributions is that we've been in an appeal situation where the reporter has accepted our education formula as being a very robust way of calculating contributions for education. At the moment, we don't have that robust formula for our community contributions. So it's to make developers aware of what their obligations are, and to be able to calculate them in a more robust and scientific way that will protect the council against any hint of challenge, and also make sure that we get sufficient contributions in. I don't agree with Councillor Wardhaw that we are a soft touch. I think we get good contributions in from our developers, and in our big sites we're getting in the region of £10,000 per units across all levels of contributions, but we don't charge up until 20 units, which I know is one point that he wants to be discussed. So I can undertake, Chairman, to put a training session in the diary in the next couple of months, although I think we'll need more than one session because there's a lot of points to look at. But I do understand that members want us to look at the policy, but also members want to have their, as Councillor Donnelly's indicated, their kind of awareness refreshed and the ability to ask questions and discuss this in detail out with the committee setting. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Pauline. Councillor Craig?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I absolutely get what Jim Wardhaw is going on about here. He's been advocating that we look at this for some considerable time. So the frustration, I feel the frustration that he has with especially seeing this particular application going through. However, I don't think under the circumstances, because this has already been for planning before and has already got planning permission, that we would stand any chance if it went to appeal, and we would lose that appeal. However, I think Pauline's offered to have that training session, and I think we should take it, but I think we should genuinely look at the policy we have. I don't think 19 is a random number for this development. I think 19 was chosen particularly because it's the cut-off for the contributions. So we obviously need to do something about that, but I think we should move on and pass this motion. But I fully respect what Jim's saying. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Callaghan.
Thank you, Chair. Just having a look at this, I know there wasn't any objection from Roads, and I'm wondering if there's anybody from Roads here that could maybe speak today, or perhaps we have information from the planners. I'm just looking for some reassurances around the fact that, you know, it's quite near the turn for Auchengrammont Roads, which can be, Union Street's quite heavy with traffic, and obviously when there's school traffic turning down there to go to St Mary's Primary, it can be quite problematic, and I just wanted some reassurance that this has been considered. Thank you.
Thank you. Is Fraser with us today?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Fraser.
Yeah, it's been considered. Obviously, we looked at this under the previous application. You're looking round about, I've got this right, yeah, 11 vehicles in an hour. So you're looking roughly about 1 every 5 minutes coming out of the site. And yeah, that's not a significant flow of traffic. Also worth noting that the existing access is an access. There's a curbed way in. The plan for this development, when it gets to kind of construction stage, will be that the footway is continued right along, so it will offer more priority for pedestrians walking down, because I know that concern has been looked at as well during the consideration of the application.
Thanks, Fraser.
Thanks, Fraser. I don't see any other hands up.
No, Chair, no further hands.
Thanks, Pauline. I'll move the report.
I'll second it, Chair.
We agree with the report?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to agenda item 7. That's Scottish Government consultation in Scotland's 4th National Planning Framework position statement and update on the reform of Scotland's planning system. And that's on page 73. And Tony will take us through the item. Thank you, Tony.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is twofold. It's to advise members of the Scottish Government consultation being carried out at the moment on Scotland's 4th National Planning Framework position statement, and to seek approval for the Council's response to that, and also to provide an update on other activities that are being carried out by the Government in relation to the wider reform of the planning system. Just in terms of background, the Government started a review of the planning system back in 2015, and officers have reported to committee on several occasions just with updates on the progress of that. And it culminated in the Planning Scotland Act 2019, receiving royal assent in July 2019. So at the moment, national planning policy prepared by Scottish Government includes the National Planning Framework, which is currently in its 3rd iteration, and it sets out the long-term spatial strategy for Scotland, and also Scottish planning policy, which contains more detailed policy on a wide range of land use planning matters. The Act, the 2019 Act, now incorporates those two documents into a single document, which will be called the National Planning Framework. And I'm going to refer to that in NPF4 through this presentation, because that's what will be referred to or known as when it's approved. So when it is approved, that National Planning Framework 4 will become part of the development plan. It'll be used for making decisions on planning applications alongside the Council's local development plan. So it's a significant change in the emphasis on and the status of that document. The work programme that was produced by the Government following the 2019 Act, that envisaged the draft NPF4 being laid before Parliament in September last year, with consultation being carried out on it thereafter. However, that timescale was delayed because of COVID-19, and it's now intended that the draft will be laid in the Scottish Parliament in the autumn of this year, with extensive public consultation and stakeholder engagement carried out at the same time. It's anticipated at the moment that NPF4 will be approved in mid-2022. As an interim measure, because of that delay, the Scottish Government published on the 26th of November last year a position statement on NPF4, and that sets out their current thinking on the future direction of the planning system, what NPF4 is likely to say. So the position statement describes NPF4 as a new spatial plan for Scotland that will look ahead to 2050 and to set out where future development can bring benefits for people, the economy and the environment. So two several themes run through the document. Firstly, in order to achieve the Scottish Government's target of net zero emissions by 2045, the statement says that we need for the planning system to be rebalanced, as it's called, so that climate change becomes an overarching priority for spatial strategy and also a guiding principle for all plans and decisions. And the second main theme is that the quality of our places matter. So places described as being where people, location, and resources come together to create a sense of identity and purpose. And it's at the heart of addressing the needs and realising the full potential of our local communities. It's the intention that they, together with organisations, will come together to improve the lives of people, support inclusive and sustainable economic growth, and also to create more successful places. The document also makes strong reference to the lessons that have been learned from COVID-19, and that's in particular in terms of the impact of that on the economy and local communities, together with the isolation that's been felt by many in terms of having access to too few accessible local amenities and green spaces. So the rest of section 4 of the report sets out the 4 key outcomes that NPF4 is going to focus on. I'm not going to go into them in any detail at all. Take them as read, but I'm happy to take questions for them as we go forward or after the meeting if members want to contact me. The 4 themes are very much interrelated and they will all work together. The Council has been given an opportunity to comment on the position statement, and our response is included as an appendix to the report. I think overall we've considered the document sets out in a succinct way the main outcomes the Scottish Government seeks to achieve through the planning system to 2050, and a long-term view was welcomed on matters including addressing climate change, tackling inequality and discrimination, securing a greener future, and also ensuring that the priorities and opportunities for local communities are met. So delivery will hopefully result in emissions targets being met and also significant changes to places in South Lanarkshire. So overall, it's considered the document provides a really strong policy direction for the future and will enable the planning system to fully contribute to these themes. As I say, the appendix sets out some comments that we consider we would like to provide to the government to take into account when they do further work on the document. And as noted earlier, as I said, the draft NPF4 will be laid before Scottish Parliament and published for consultation later this year. It's intended when that happens that we'll present a further report updating members and seeking approval of any council response to that policy document, and we bring that to the planning committee at the appropriate time. Section 5 of the report that gives an update on activity that the government has or is about to take place over the coming year. Again, I take it as read. There's a fair amount of significant work going to be carried out. Changes to the local development plan system, for example, the ability of local communities to prepare their own local place plans, and also a statutory requirement now for councils to prepare open space strategies. And again, that's all set out in detail in the report. So just to conclude then, or just to conclude with the recommendation, it's to ask members to know what the report says going forward, and also seek approval for the council's consultation response. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tony. Any questions for Tony?
Councillor Scott, Councillor Allison.
Thank you, Paul and Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. Just hitting my button there. Thank you thanks to Tony and the officers for an excellent report on this. A couple of points I want to raise. On 5.4, review of permitted development rights, and on consultation on planning fees, the next item. On permitted development rights, in Scotland we have rural poverty as well as urban poverty, and I'll expand on that. In South Lanarkshire we have rural poverty as well as urban poverty. In terms of the review of permitted development rights, I'd like to see more done in terms of, it seems to be concentrating on single one-off developments in terms of houses getting converted from agricultural to houses. I'd like to see more latitude in terms of social housing developments in the rural area. It seems to be very farm orientated, and that's not having a dig, no pun intended. It seems to be farm orientated rather than there's a need for social housing developments in rural areas as well. So I'd like to see that expanded. And on the other one, people have heard me over the years, consultation on planning fees. I concur with Jim Wardhaw in the previous application when he said developers aren't paying enough in community contributions. They're not paying enough on planning fees either. We've got to have a realistic regime in terms of planning fees for developers, for everyone, because at the moment, given the amount of officer time that's going in these applications, we have had an application referred to earlier in this agenda today. We have 4 officers attended one site meeting. I'm not saying that's a regular occurrence, but the amount of officer times in this, if you counted up the salaries of those officers who attended that site visit, we've got to get far more realistic planning fees from developers and individuals. I think at the moment they're probably getting a bargain in that relation. So I'll be interested in Tony or Pauline's response. And once again, that's an excellent report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Graham. Pauline, you want to come in?
Thanks, Chair. Just on the fee income point, yes, Councillor Scott, it's quite disappointing that the government's haven't responded in detail to the consultation on planning fees. It's quite disappointing that the Scottish Government's actually kicked this into the long grass, certainly in the short term, because I think I've informed members before that at the moment in South Lanarkshire we're sitting at about 70% cost recovery in terms of our planning fees. So that means that the council taxpayers supplementing the development industry, which is the point made by Councillor Scott. And certainly our fee income is down this year considerably in the department due to the pandemic. It has slightly recovered in the last couple of months because we've had some larger applications in. But although our income is down quite a lot, our application numbers are not down. And we've got a lot of small scale household applications, I think, as well as because of the pandemic, people seeking to extend their houses to create more living space, building extensions, building garden offices. People can't spend their money on going on holiday, so they're investing in their property. So we've got a lot of small scale, and the point that Councillor Scott makes very well is that you can see from 2 applications on this committee agenda that the smaller scale applications don't necessarily take up less time than the larger ones, although it's the larger ones that give us a bigger amount of fee income. And if the fee incomes were put up across the board, that would certainly help the department. The other point in that is that we do hope at some point, possibly for the 22-23 financial year, to ask you to approve that we charge for discretionary things like pre-application consultation. It's something that we do quite well. We encourage developers to come and speak to us before they put their applications in, and try and consult with consultees and get any issues out of the way and dealt with and considered early in the process. But we can't charge for that at the moment, and that also takes up a lot of officers' time. And we did some work in the past that showed that we could probably employ an advanced planning officer with the amount of money that we could pull in a year from those sorts of charges. So that is something that we will be coming to you in due course, members, particularly with the pressure on local government budgets. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Pauline. Councillor Ellison.
Thank you. Concur with some of what Councillor Scott said. Social housing is important in all areas, but for social housing to be a benefit in the rural area, there requires to be local work for them. There is less ability, perhaps in that group, to travel the larger distances to access work. The cost of that becomes a negative. I think it becomes very important then that in the rural area, particularly around hamlets, villages, etc., the flexibility to allow new businesses to operate that can employ local people. That then needs to be part of this. I know it's mentioned within here, Tony, but I think a lot of that needs to be stronger, emphasised a great deal more. There is also a significant difference in the remoter rural area, which Graham indicated is farming. The level of employment in that industry is declining. And again, there needs to be a greater flexibility in allowing new types of businesses. The infrastructure for that, the big one, is broadband, which seems to be taking an eternity to improve. So I would have liked to see a lot, these two particular issues emphasised a great deal more in what is needed within the rural area. You also, I thought, used interesting words when it was suggested that everywhere you should be able to walk 20 minutes and access all services. You used the words challenging. I think that's the most understated statement in the whole paper, and you do need to, I think, be be less politically correct and actually nail these points a lot harder so that the planning regulations can change and support the rural economy and not be a detriment as it too often is presently. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson.
Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Can I just clarify with Pauline about the planning fees, and just to get a sense of how we compare against, other local authorities in Scotland with regards to that? Am I right in saying that we are probably the lowest in the whole of Scotland for that, Pauline? And from what I can gather from looking at some of the stats, Renfrewshire is one of the highest, and the recovery rate is really low. So there's a thin line there in terms of, how we actually introduce a higher rate in order to recover some of those fees back. Because you're saying that at the moment we're at 70%, is that right?
Yes, yeah, we're about 70% as opposed to our cost. The fees are set nationally, Councillor Stevenson, so we don't set the actual standard fees are set nationally, so they would be put up across the board. It's the discretionary charges that we would have the flexibility about, and whether or not we start charging for things like pre-app discussions. When I first looked at this for South Lanarkshire, which is some 4 or 5 years ago, only 2 or 3 authorities in Scotland were charging for that, but now we think about 50% at least of authorities are starting to charge, although there is, because the legislation is not fully in place to enable us to charge, there is some legal debate about whether that would be lawful or not, albeit 50% of planning authorities are currently charging for discretionary items and are not being challenged, so I think we'd be fairly safe. So by the time we get to the next financial year, which is what I was proposing, then hopefully that will be lawful and we'll be able to do it after going through due process. But I am aware, Councillor, that a number of authorities, and especially Fife, charge for a great deal of discretionary items and are able to pull in a fair amount of money to support their planning system by doing that. Thanks.
Chair.
Chair, Councillor Wardhall and then Councillor Shearer.
Yeah. I would just like to echo some of the stuff that's been said about 5.5 and about the planning fees. I think there's an unfortunate situation, and I think the government are dragging their feet. And I think that's probably because they're under a lot of pressure from developers and business people. But at the end of the day, councils have to make cuts in services. And I think to a large extent, the government places the interests of local authorities below that of developers and businesses. And I think, they are dragging their feet. And even the scale of charges that they had proposed, I don't think was adequate for what local authorities need.
Chair, you're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you, Councillor Shearer.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to thank Tony for his report, very interesting. But I would also like to make a plea for greater diversity in the rural areas. I think Alec Allison is right. I think there is a need to look at how planning and development go forward in the rural area. There's a great need for imagination of a new way to do things. Tourism, agriculture, these are the main economic activities in the rural area, and planning has a role to play in how we take that forward. But we need the flexibility to look at how that impacts on the local communities and how it affects the economy of a wider area. And you have to take into consideration one of our biggest problems in the rural area is 20-minute walk to facilities. Talk about a 20-minute drive to facilities and we might be closer to the mark. So transport is a key issue that has to be taken into consideration, and that has a big impact on everything that's done in the rural area, from education to work to health. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. don't see any other hands up, Pauline.
No, Chair, no more hands.
Thank you. Can we move the report?
Agree that, Chair.
Happy to agree.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you all very much for attending. I don't have any other urgent business, so I would like to say again thank you, and I'll close the meeting and I'll ask Pauline to switch off the recording. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Take care.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks,
Chair.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
Vote of thanks to the Chair.
Well done.
Thanks.